and I'm a park planner. I'm going to kick off our master planning presentation today, and I'd like to welcome everybody and thank you for your interest in Lake Taghkanic State Park. Looking forward to having a really productive meeting and hearing what everyone has to say and their experiences at the park. Next slide, please. So before we get started, just a couple housekeeping items. The webinar is being recorded, and after today, the meeting should be posted on our website, the park's website, and we can provide a link. We'll send a follow-up email with a link so that you can either forward it to people who couldn't make it or take a look at it yourself. Just so you know, closed captions are available on the lower left side of WebEx. You'll see a little CC button. You can click on that and it'll give you closed captions. After this presentation, we're going to open the meeting up for your comments, and you can either unmute yourself or you can also write anything, comments or questions in the chat button on the right-hand side. And you can do that at any point during the presentation and the meeting. If you have any tech questions, if you're having trouble, you can type those in the chat and we'll see if we can address them if possible. All right, next slide, please. So today's agenda, we're going to have introductions of who's in the meeting today, who's going to be talking or going to be there for informative purposes. We're going to give you a brief overview of the master planning process. We're going to talk a little bit about the park background and what we're going to be looking at in the master plan, the features of the park that are going to be considered, and different master plan elements. And that'll probably be, I'd say, 20 to 25 minutes long, the discussion, and then we'll open it up for discussion. So the primary participants in the meeting today are really the attendees, and that's why we're having this meeting, so we can hear from visitors and neighbors and other stakeholders. But I'd like to introduce the people who are going to be answering questions and who know a lot about the park. First, we have Linda Cooper. She's the Taghkanic Region Director. Chris Ricard is the Lake Taghkanic State Park Manager. Tana Bigelow, myself, I'm a park planner. I'm based up in Albany. Megan Zimba, another park planner, and Dan Lewis, our environmental analyst for the master plan. And we also have people who are available to answer some more technical or specific questions that you might have, including, I'm sorry here, one second. Okay, Bill Kratinger, he's a project director, Division for Historic Preservation. Rob Snyder, Park Operations Manager, and Eric Justino, who's an Assistant Park Manager. So that's us, and I'd now like to hand it over to Linda Cooper, the Taghkanic Region Director for State Parks.
Welcome, everybody, and thanks so much for joining us. As we go through this process of having, an information meeting on the master plan, it's really heartening to see all of you who have signed up to participate. We have members of our Taghkanic State Parks Commission. Thank you, Fred and Linda, for joining us. I see members, Rich Gromek. It's so nice to see that you signed in, a former Parks employee who we miss greatly, and to see people who work in the town. Lisa, thank you for joining Columbia Land Conservancy, and so many of the neighbors who have signed on to help us make this plan as meaningful and relevant to the community as it is to state parks. And today we're going to kind of learn the process of the plan, but I really urge you to think about this amazing park asset and how it sits in the community, how you use it, and what it potentially could do, in the near future of 5 to 10 years, which is sort of the life of the master plan, or maybe a little bit longer. It's an amazing asset within Columbia County, and this plan gives us an opportunity to look hard at it, and also to create some baseline data, and to be conscious of what we do have. So we appreciate all of you taking your time today. We will also be meeting in person on Thursday evening at the Taghkanic Firehouse. And so it's the same presentation. You don't have to be at both, but if there's something you think about, as you'll get direction later, but there'll be time for you to add if you think of something after this call. And I'm just on a side note, I do want to share, we did have a fire at the park today. For those of you that don't know, one of our cottages burned to the ground. We're very grateful that it was unoccupied, that basically we're closed for the season, that it didn't spread any further than the single cottage. And while it's under investigation and there's no direct, we don't have the official cause, what we presume happened was we were drying paint from a painting job, and maybe the heater may have overheated and ignited a fire, given how cold it got last night. So we don't know that is exactly what happened, but that is what we're thinking at the moment. And Chris, Ricard, I don't know if you wanted to add anything else to that before we get started with the master plan.
That was discovered first thing when the staff came in at 7 a.m. this morning. Was the structure was pretty much gone when that was discovered. So thank you to Taghkanic Fire and all the mutual aid departments that supplied manpower and water to basically mop up. So yeah, we're saddened by that loss. It's it was a nice cottage, but it was not done by the electric. We don't think about the electric was shut off in the building. It was something, possibly a portable heater that was put in the unit. So we're still investigating with state and county fire and working close with them to make sure that this does not happen again.
Can you
Thanks,
tell us
Chris.
which unit it was?
It was cottage 165.
Oh, that's a loss. Thank you.
Yeah, it is. Anyway, that's my comments, but we're going to switch back to Tana as we start to go into the process. And again, thank you all. And Rich, I see you just turned on your camera. So nice to see you. Thanks. Bye.
All right. Thanks, Linda and Chris. So question is, why are we developing a master plan for Lake T right now? When we embark on this, we realize that it takes a lot of staff time, and overall, it usually takes between 1.5 to 2 years to complete a master plan. In this case, for Lake Taghkanic State Park, the park hasn't had a master plan in the past. And when parks don't have a plan, they can develop piecemeal or in ways that don't take into account the bigger picture excuse me, into consideration, and this can result in impacts to levels of service, to the natural environment, or incompatible uses can be developed. The master plan basically provides a blueprint for the park and region to use to guide future development or use areas. And it also provides the opportunity for the public to help shape and improve the park for the future, and in ways that they anticipate will be needed. So the plan, as Linda said, usually applies to a time frame about 10 to 15 years. And when we start out a master plan, the first thing we do is we bring the appropriate people to the table. The core team is formed. The planning team usually consists of the regional director, the park manager or managers, at least one park planner, an environmental analyst. We'll get into a little later what their role is. Historic preservation staff, trails planners, regional biologists, New York Natural Heritage Program staff, and we bring in other people as necessary. We might bring in someone who's an expert in developing interpretive material or educational content, people who can help us with infrastructure or architectural questions, specialized, environmental specialists and things like that. So, and of course, we bring in the interested public, park visitors, people who live in the area who have a lot invested in the park, and it's their neighbor. So Right. For a plan to be effective, it needs to be basically informed by the people who know and use the park. So throughout the planning process, we provide multiple opportunities for you to give your input and be involved in the process. First of all, we have these public meetings. When we were in COVID mode, we had just the virtual meetings, but this time we're actually going to have an in-person meeting, as Linda mentioned, on Thursday evening, early evening. There's also a public comment period that's held during the environmental review process, and Dan will talk a little bit about that environmental review later. And when the draft plan, the complete draft plan is published, we hold another public meeting, and there's an open comment period during that time. So you'll have a chance to look at the entire document in a draft form, so nothing is written in stone, and you'll have a chance to provide feedback on that. Then the final plan includes a chapter with public comments that were received on the final draft, and the agency provides responses to those comments and also adjusts the or revises the material in the plan based on the public comments. So at any time during plan development, you can submit your comments. We'll provide the contact information on the last slide here. It'll be up on the screen for a while. And we do have comment periods, but we'll always be looking at our emails. And so if you have anything that comes to mind, or if you'd like to contact one of us, then feel free to contact us at any time. All right, so I'd like to pass it along to Megan, our other planner, to talk about the different elements of the master plan.
Thanks, Tana. So the planning process is always guided by Parks' mission statement, which is to provide safe and enjoyable recreational and interpretive opportunities for all New York State residents and visitors, and to be responsible stewards of our valuable natural, historic, and cultural resources. So with that in mind, a completed master plan includes two major sections: the master plan document itself that will typically contain an introduction to the park's history and existing conditions, the background and development of the preferred alternatives, and a projected timetable for the prioritized actions. And the second component, the environmental impact statement, describes the park's environmental setting, proposed actions for the park, and a discussion of possible effects of these actions, and how to mitigate any potential impacts that may arise from plan's implementation. A map of the master plan's elements is also included in the plan. This master plan map visually depicts existing park elements and shows the locations for all new work that's proposed in the plan. This can be especially helpful for someone who may not be as familiar with the park or who's reading the plan for the first time. The plan's appendices also include reference information relevant to the park, including maps that illustrate its physical elements, as well as information on the park's natural, cultural, and recreational resources. So as Tana mentioned earlier, there's a range of opportunities for the public to provide input on their experiences at the park and suggest ideas that will help to shape the plan. Beginning early in plan development, public surveys, meetings, and comment periods bring key ideas into the planning process that will help to inform the plan content later on. So right now we'll discuss the public survey in a little more detail. So the survey was launched over the summer to collect basic feedback about how visitors use the park. For those of you that have already taken the time to answer the survey, thank you. It's still open, and we'll be putting the link in the chat later for anybody who may be interested in taking it that's not done so already. The survey asked questions like, during what season do you typically visit the park? To which almost 95% of people answered summer, not surprisingly. And you can see fall and spring are also fairly popular, with winter having the lowest visitation. We also asked, how long have you been coming to this park? Over 50% of respondents answered more than 20 years, which demonstrates a really long-standing connection to Lake Taghkanic. And lastly, this is a map with zip codes of respondents highlighted in red. It's interesting to see that while the majority are New York State residents, people from outside New York State also have a really strong interest in the park. And now I'll hand it over to Chris to talk about the park's history.
Good afternoon, everyone. Just some of you are probably more educated on the park history than even myself. I came camping here in cabin number 2 when I was about 3 years old. But the park history goes way back to the indigenous Mohegan Indians that's inhabited the land. Obviously, development of our nation back in the, in the manor system was also private land at the time. And with the New Deal and the creation of CCC and the Taghkanic Parkway, both the state park was being created, but also private cottages on the western side of the lake. So over time, Mr. Livingston made some land deals and became Lake Taghkanic State Park as we know it now. It used to be called Lake Charlotte, as you see in that lower left picture, back when it was majority private land. And after we became a whole state park, we've kind of developed over time. The East Beach area was actually the main area of the state park, and the original campground area, with our cabins and cottages all go back to the CCC era. There was a CCC camp in the park, which was somewhat interconnected with Taghkanic State Park and Copake Falls area that was also being designed and constructed during that time. And the Taghkanic Parkway was just a grand plan of bringing folks out of urban areas up to many state parks, James Baird, Fonsstock, Clarence Fonsstock State Park, up that highway, and us kind of being not the terminus, but one of the final northern parks on that journey, which we still have today. A lot of folks utilize the park from long distances, as Megan showed in that slide. So now our summer attendance is very busy for both day use, picnicking, and obviously our boat rentals, and obviously our very popular West Beach. In 2008, there was a consolidation of the East Beach had some infrastructure issues that were not easily solvable due to the plumbing underneath concrete flooring. So the park office, and if everyone remembers 08, there's a big governmental shrinkage in trying to find ways to do more with less. And West Beach was kind of where most of the park operations were moved to for our administrative side. So the East Beach sits idle. We're aware of it. Your surveys have shown it. And our master plan is plans to address some ideas of maybe a reutilization of that area. That's kind of the background, and other things in the park, but that's we know that's why a lot of people are on this meeting, is to discuss that.
All right, great. Thank you, Chris. Thanks, Megan. So I'm just going to run through some of the things that are going to be addressed in the plan. I think that the first thing that we start out with is taking a really close look at what's in the park already. We do basically an existing conditions inventory. We look at the natural areas. We look at the sports and recreation infrastructure, historic elements, camping areas, and the condition of those, picnic areas and pavilions, roads, parking areas, walkways, pedestrian vehicular infrastructure, educational programs and events, or special activities at the park, administration and staffing, and concessions. So that process alone, looking at existing conditions, is a large portion of the first phase of the planning process. As Chris mentioned, there's really some interesting architectural and historical buildings and infrastructure in the park, much of it left over from the CCC era. So basically the plan identifies what's in the park, important aspects of the site's historic and cultural elements, and just to really make sure that they're recognized, that they're there, that they're documented, and that they're going to be preserved. This can include not just buildings, but archaeology. Sometimes there's areas that may be archaeologically sensitive, for instance, round water bodies and things like that, and they may not have been investigated yet. And so, but there's known, that there would be archaeological elements there. And then also just like looking at what makes up the overall park character. What is the landscape? How does the landscape read? Next slide. Thank you. Natural resources, the park has many really beautiful natural areas. Looking at and identifying the park's wildlife, its water resources, natural habitats that it might have. It's important to identify what they are and what condition they're in order to become better stewards of these elements. We'll be working with regional biologists and the New York State Natural Heritage Program. And the plan considers ways that these areas can be protected and how to improve them, including any sensitive areas or if there are any rare or endangered species in the area. Important natural elements at Lake Taghkanic, of course, is the lake. There are some wetlands that are both state mapped and federal mapped wetlands in the area. Natural communities, there may be some very specialized natural woodlands. And then there may be protected species such as New England cottontails or rare freshwater mussels. So we also look at the recreational infrastructure, as I said, both how it is now used and what kind of condition it is in, and what are public preferences for future activities and facilities. Next slide, please. So the park's operations, maintenance, and infrastructure are integral to having a well-functioning facility that is safe and will meet the public's needs and expectations. Considerations include accessibility. There may be other things that need to be addressed: circulation, utilities, signage, camping facilities, the park maintenance area, or unused sections in the park or unused buildings, and drainage, things like that we need to identify and decide what kind of condition they're in. Okay, the park also considers, the plan also considers the park's approach to education and interpretation, and also looks at new ideas for special events and programs, for educational signage, different kinds of interests that people may have now or that we anticipate that people are becoming more interested in. Suggestions and ideas from park users and other people who have an interest in outdoor recreation in the area are really important to identify what these elements are. We can do a lot of research to find out what, recreation trends are and things like that, but we really need to hear from the people who are at the park and using it on a regular basis, are interested in seeing. So the function and quality of all of these elements are considered in the master plan, and then after we've done the existing conditions chapters, then we start looking at what are potential future actions that could be implemented in the park. And so we go through a extensive process of identifying feasible alternatives and then trying to determine what will be the most desirable things to see happen at the park. So once we've identified these future actions and the preferred alternatives and the actions that we think that we would like to see implemented have been selected, the environmental analyst begins to look at the potential impacts to these actions. And I am going to hand it over to Dan now to talk about the environmental review component of the master plan.
Hello. State law requires that planning processes, including master plans, receive environmental review. The seeker process identifies the plan's proposed actions and their associated potential impacts, reviews those impacts, and determines if those actions have the potential for significant adverse impacts to the environment. Parks rarely proposes actions that have significant adverse impacts. However, the scope and breadth of all the actions in a master plan, when taken together, have greater potential for environmental impacts, and Parks has traditionally conducted an environmental impact statement on master plans to demonstrate how those potential impacts will be addressed. Next slide, please. Primarily, impacts identified in master plans are to land, surface waters, flora and fauna, habitats, and cultural and archaeological resources. Initial efforts to reduce or eliminate these risks involve site location to avoid impacting the resources and choosing areas already disturbed so as to prevent new impacts. If avoidance isn't possible, then efforts are made to minimize the size of the impact. Pervious pavers, building size reductions, narrowing trail width are examples of this. If impacts cannot be avoided or significantly minimized, then other mitigation factors may need to be considered, such as expanding buffer areas. Over to Megan.
Great, thanks, Dan. Okay, so what happens once the plan is completed? The master plan provides a methodical approach to identifying and implementing important upgrades and other improvements at the park, and implementation of these recommended actions will be determined by the availability of funding. So going forward, our group will begin to develop more substantive content for the master plan. Building upon input received in these public meetings, the planning team will conduct research and compile documents, photos, and other information to contribute to the plan. Once a draft plan is underway, the environmental analyst will initiate the seeker process. And now back to Tana.
All right, thank you, Megan and Dan. That was sort of a really, lightning version of the planning process. I'm sure you have questions and thoughts that you'd like to add. And so what we'd like to do now is open up the meeting for your comments. You can either unmute yourself or you can write comments in the chat, as I mentioned before. And we also received a number of comments on the actual registration forms where we had the question, what would you be interested in hearing about or discussing at the meeting? So I think what I'll do is I'll start with those because there were a lot of commonalities there. And as Chris said, one of the big ones was the East Beach and the bathhouse building, which is something that is going to be taking a lot of time in the planning process to take a look at it. I know that we have people that we work with in parks who grew up going to the East Beach and have really great memories of being there as a kid. The building is a really interesting building. It has a lot of potential for different uses. So this is something that there's definitely going to occupy, many hours of planning discussions. But we're definitely interested in hearing your thoughts on it. If anybody wants to step in now and either on the panel or people in the audience. If not, then I'll just I'll move on. We have some other comments that we have here are for us to take a look at cabin upgrades. There were a number of comments about updating the cottages and the cabins, better access for vehicle loading. The cabins, some of them have, I think most of them have a historic designation, and are in they're in pretty good shape for the most part, but there are possibilities for upgrading. We have comments on different activities at the park, water aerobics, cleaning up the boat launch, lap lanes for swimming are some of the suggestions that we see here. Obviously, restoration of the East Bathhouse, someone wrote because of its historic significance, that it's an important building. As we mentioned, there's a question about beaver activity at the park. I think that's in the southern part of the park. Is that right? But I'm not sure exactly what the question is. If anybody wants to elaborate on that.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
So, hi, I'm Betsy, and I frequent the park, and I really enjoy seeing the beavers, and I know that there's an area where it appears the beaver constructions are frequently dismantled and removed. I presume that's because it causes some flooding on the service road back there, and I'm just wondering, is there a better plan going to be considered going forward to deal with those beaver habitats?
I'll answer that. We actually have, we're talking with biologists right now, of putting in a beaver deceiver.
Yeah.
One issue, I was ready to put this in this fall. The one issue is the other organisms that area, is that we can't, if we are to knock down and put in piping there, right now, all the turtles and frogs are going to sleep for the winter time. So the Natural Resources Division of our agency has said, hold off to July is when we can do an official install of these new culvert systems that will trick the beavers by being underwater way upstream and way downstream, that they can continue to think they're damming the outflow, but the water will still be going underneath. So that's our plan. We're handcuffed with the timeline of all the amphibians and reptiles that are in that area that are bedding right now. So we have to be kind of sensitive to that. But it's not really something in the master plan. It's something that we're just doing on an research in the park on it.
Well, can I just say I'm thrilled to hear that. Yeah.
My name is Kenny. I've been fishing this lake for 35 years. That one beaver dam, I've met that beaver. That's one big beaver. I've seen that situation fixed by not doing the beaver anything, but also raising the road for your path. Also, the boat launch creek, how it has overgrown is causing a problem with water flow. That needs to be dredged, and that can be dredged without harming the surrounding areas. With when the boats are all cleared out that are tied up there. But that is one big beaver there. He will scare the heck out of you if you're in a boat. He comes up next to you. He seems to be doing pretty well, and like you said, the frogs, they're everywhere back there. And I come from New Jersey, 2.5-hour ride. I think that's one of the best lakes for small unknown lakes on the east. And I will continue to come there. The only thing I would like to see is have the launch creek dredged out and maybe the road down to the launch and the launch area built up a little. But that's about it.
Yeah, I'll answer that too. That is something we're definitely going to be putting into the plan of addressing, making that one more accessible as well. It's kind of just a gravel road that dips into the lake. We will be addressing that. Thank you for your comments.
If I could, this is Kathy Costello. If I could just add to that, because I store my kayak there every year, and yeah, the road now is a mess. There's lots of ruts from the season, and it's just, there's poison ivy around this year. The gypsy moths were like, they covered my kayak, the gypsy moth larvae and everything. So, if we could just look into that, that would, as you said, that would be great. And I just want to say, I will second, I love Lake Taghkanic. Everyone that works there is phenomenal. It's just a peaceful, wonderful place to be. So I thank you all for that. And then I am also the one that wrote in about the water aerobics and the lap lanes. I mean, I'm not looking for, an Olympic-sized swimming pool, but maybe just like another lane outside where the buoys end, just because when you're there, the kids, are coming in and out and everything, and you kind of have to stop your swimming because you don't want to hit them while you're swimming. And as far as water aerobics, I just thought it would be a nice community thing to do in the summer for people to get together. But that's my comments, and just thank you again. It's a terrific place.
All right, yeah, thank you, Kathy. One of the things that I wanted to follow up on that someone mentioned was accessibility. That was another thing that had been written in the registration forms, and that's a big section of our plans these days, is to address to make the park more accessible just overall, and trying to look at different ways that we can do that. I also see a note in the chat that says, will the plan address potential new acreage additions to the park? I can start by answering that and say definitely yes. New acquisitions are always considered in the plan, and the goal is to try to integrate them better into the park. whether it's through trails connections, wetland enhancement to try to create more connectivity in the wetland areas, trying to create better habitat, looking at them as for potential recreation, access for passive recreation, things like that. So yes, the answer is definitely yes. Those will be considered very carefully in the plan. I don't know if any other parks people want to jump in on that one.
I'll just comment our trail stewards that we have. We do have in our region trail stewards that are GPSing potential areas for an expanded trail system, loops that can be accessed and connected. So we are planning on expanding trails out that way. Nate Wenzel is one of our, and Chris Morris are two heavy hitters with crews working underneath them. So there will be, obviously with public comment and environmental review, but we are looking, that's why those acquisitions were made, was just to have a more wild, undeveloped part of the park where people can enjoy, again, what Tana said is passive recreation.
And if I could add, we've also been looking at, what are the connections out to New Forge Forest, and it's not exactly direct, but is there a way to bring the park and the forest holdings, into sort of a closer proximity? So I think that that's very much on our minds, is how to expand. We looked at some of the headwater properties that had some of the headwaters, things that could, we are doing some trail planning right now on one of the parcels that was recently acquired, and we have a second parcel going through process right now for acquisition to add to the park acreage. So we're very much interested in expanding a bit of the park.
Yeah, thanks, Linda. And also one of the registrants wrote in that they were interested in better trail access and better signage for the trails. And this, we're already aware of that. And it's the case in a lot of parks that they have great trail systems, but people are not always really clear about where to access them. So, the trails will be assessed, and usually what we do is our trails planners get out there and they actually take a look at, they walk all of the trails and they determine what kind of shape they're in, if there's any trails that need to be repaired or restored or possibly rerouted around sensitive areas, if there's chronic wet areas and things like that. And also I think the signage, just not for the trails, but for the overall park and the circulation is something that we always consider that in a plan, and some parks have more need for revamps in that than others. So that's something that will definitely be considered in the plan.
And Tana, if I could just respond to Elizabeth and Kathy for their very nice words about the park and the park staff. I know their park staff works very, very hard, both to keep the park up to whatever level we can, given funding and staffing, and to make that as great a location as it is, and to take good care of the patrons that come. So thank you.
Yeah, it's very nice to hear. I'm sure for the park staff especially. Another thing that I see on the list of topics that people were interested in discussing is, one of them is glamping. I'm not sure if there was a question about glamping or, if you wanted to make a comment about it, if that person is on.
My name is George Weidler, and I'm not interested in the glamping, but I imagine Rob's probably chuckling when he heard the name. In any case, to give you a little bit of an idea, my family goes back to the time when it was Lake Shalott, and my mom passed away about 3 years ago. Rob always wanted to get a hold of her. She was 96 when she passed, and we were talking about that East Beach bathhouse. My mom shared with me that the very first lifeguard that there ever was at Lake Taghkanic used to swim across the lake every day to see her. So my biggest interest is in having the park, the historic parts of it, brought back to where they really belong. The bathhouse, the Livingston House, these are historic structures that have great significance within the Roosevelt presidency. This is really a gem that we have in the Hudson Valley. I don't think there's any family that was as influential as the Roosevelts were. So, you know, I could go on and on and on as far as the recollection that my mom had and shared with me. You know, each and every superintendent from Ham to Fred Harder to Dave Stipplebean to Rob. You know, I've known all of them, and I really just would love for parts of the park to be put back to where they should be historically. And I know that my mom is absolutely thrilled hearing this discussion.
Thank you, George. I don't know. Oh, go ahead.
Tana, I was the one who suggested the question about glamping. I'm Fred Osborne. I'm a Taghkanic Regional Commissioner. And I was just interested in the trends that I read about of upper end camping facilities that are being developed all over the country, and whether our Parks Department is interested in doing that, or are we pretty much committed to remaining in the more rustic, all outdoors feeling that our places have. That said, a number of our cabins and facilities are pretty high level and pretty nice, but has this concept of very high level, very expensive outdoor camping been talked about?
Maybe I should take that one. So I think glamping has been talked about a little bit, and toward that end, we entered into a concession agreement with a company called Tenter. As you know, that has had mixed results in terms of how that has worked. There are still some Tenter sites at Lake Taghkanic. Internally, we've talked about the fact that we thought we might be able to do that, offer that service a little better handled within parks, but it hasn't been actually put into any formal proposal to go in that direction. And in particular, perhaps because we really put the emphasis on affordability and the ability coming into the parks, but it's not. If there was the right location or the right way of doing it, it's not that something like that could not be considered.
Thank you, Linda.
Let's see. So one question.
The question on what does mixed results mean? And Chris, would you like to take that, or do you want me to answer?
No, I'll do this. Obviously, we have a concessionaire for a camping system. Just like a concessionaire would be if you come visit the concession stand at the West Beach, is that person it's not park staff that's serving the hot dogs. There's someone that's pays the state a percentage to have their business there. And tenters come into multiple parks, including Taghkanic State Park, Copake Falls, and Rudd Pond. But you know, their system is it's hard to guarantee hours for staff, so they don't hire a 40-hour person to be the caretaker. If this was on your private property, Tenter is a great model because you are vested into that, having folks come, greeting them, giving them cookies, whatever, helping set their site up. Here, it's a little Tenter, because they are operating many sites on the Northeast and the West Coast and all over, you know, in beautiful spots around the country. But the staffing is a little short-sighted for what the needs are of the person. You know, it should be really a 24-hour on-call system. So we have these folks sort of spread around the park and no one's there to greet them. We've sort of stepped in a little bit this past summer. It's been a little more successful because, again, like Linda said, we're taking on the role of, okay, check in with us and we will show you where your site is or direct you to it. But it is still on the concessionaire to clean and mow and take care of these areas. So it's been a big work in progress that we've been working on. So mixed results. So some people have showed up. There's late at night, it's been dark, and there's no way to find their site. So that's not a good result, right? We want everyone to have a good experience. That's why we have a check-in process for our campers in our cottages, cabins, and campground. You're here by 9 o'clock. There's someone there to greet you with a smile and bring you to your site. If there's some sort of need for a tent or camper, they pick up the phone. It may be someone out in Utah that answers 8 hours later. So that's, again, for us, we usually are pretty responsive. If someone has a complaint, our office opens at 8 a.m. and they can deal with it there. So, but the good result is that they're beautiful spots. They're in our prime areas of the park where a family can either get a single site, a double site, or a triple site on these tents, and you have your own little slice of Lake Taghkanic heaven on the water, which is the good result. People are very happy that you're kind of away from a developed campground where the sites are a little closer together and you have to look and see and hear other people throughout your stay. So that's the mixed results. I think we can keep working to make it better. It has gotten better in the past few years with more and more of these issues being hashed out.
Kenneth Huber again. Have you guys in your plan had anything for more employees? Because if you're going to bring more and more people into that park, you know what's going to happen. We bring black bags every time we go fishing, and we pick up more stuff in our travels. So you really are going to need more personnel if you're going to expand this park and, add more tents and add more people to it.
From your lips to the Division of Budget's ears, we
Yes,
certainly agree with you. And we advocate for more staffing throughout the entire agency, and we've been very lucky. The Director of Budget within our agency has been successful, and we participate in helping to educate the Division of Budget as to what our needs and how a small amount of money coming into parks goes a long way. But we're part of a larger state system, so we're not totally in control of that. But we do advocate for more staffing on a regular basis throughout our system, and agree with you, and thank you for noticing. But what staff we do have does a great job, and we'll continue to try and support them.
Oh yeah, your park is definitely one of the cleanest parks I've ever been in, and that's amazing.
Yeah, and I'd like to just make a comment also about that the plan doesn't necessarily look to expand the visitorship. I think ideally a plan that's effective will try to maybe spread the visitorship out over more seasons, or to create opportunities in underused parts of the park that are already developed. So it's not necessarily a goal of the plan. When we talk about, the plan will result in development, we're not really talking necessarily about, we're going to build a whole new area over in one section or something like that, but more like, what is the best possible use of this park, and how can we, make it something that will be a wonderful destination, and even more than it already is. I also wanted to pull in Bill Cradinger from our historic preservation to address a comment earlier about some of the historic elements in the park, and how they might be looked at as part of the plan.
Sure, thanks, Tana. It probably bears noting that we consider Lake Taghkanic a historic district. So basically a collection of resources that portray the development of the park from its earliest years, and even some pre-park resources. I wanted to speak quickly to the bathhouse. I've been to the park numerous times, and it's one of the first things I saw and said, look at this. This is unfortunate. one of the challenges is really we need to find adaptive uses. You know, we need to explore adaptive reuse for these buildings. You know, they're built at a time, bathhouses in the 30s and 40s, when people showed up to a park, they got out of their car, they went in, they changed, you know, and then they went in the water. You know, this type of building is somewhat redundant now. Most people show up and, you know, they're ready to go. They got their bathing suit on. So it's actually something I think we deal with statewide in terms of, you know, how to retask some of these buildings. I will say we have already put a significant amount of thought into, you know, playing some ideas around what could this building do? You know, what function could it serve? How does it fit into the plan? It's sort of one of the puzzle pieces is how do we use it? How do we keep its historic character while allowing for a new use that will, you know, justify investment in it? And I just want to circle back to the Roosevelt comment. Don't forget, Roosevelt was also an early commission member of the Taghkanic State Park Commission.
Oh, Bill, has anybody ever looked into grants? Since how old is that building? It's got to be historic. And keeping it historic, there should be some grants for that building.
Yeah, it's mid 1930s. So basically, property was being acquired for the park beginning in the late 20s, really in the early 30s. There wasn't a lot of development until that CCC camp was established, came up from Boston Corner. They were working at Taghkanic. So really 35, 36 is when the park really starts to, you know, the physical environment of the park really begins to be shaped. And of course, after the Second World War as well into the 50s. And you know, the parkway is the critical part of this plan to link all these various park sites with urban areas to the south. So they knew even before the parkway was done, the second the parkway gets to this park, you know, its popularity is going to increase exponentially.
Yeah, because I could see doing something like maybe fixing the bathrooms for the public, but the rest of the site, making it into a historic place where they can see how things were, you know, people who never knew about bathhouses, you know, and the building and the history of it so they can learn from it. And just, you know, don't let them use the bath part, but just, you know, have the restrooms there for them and maybe just clean up the outside area by the beach and all so people could hang out down there, you know, but not swim.
Those are all good ideas. We've been adding interpretive signs around the park. I don't know if you've had a chance to see them, but we agree. It's nice to be able to share the history there.
I couldn't agree more with what the last person said. This goes back to when Dave was there, and probably even before that, when East Beach bathhouse started to become a little decrepit. You know, I could foresee this as an interactive educational building, as well as serving as a bath and restroom support for an expanded camping area. Anytime that you go into the park, on the weekends especially, the campgrounds are at max. And you would think that not only the Taghkanic State Park region, but the state as a whole would want to, you know, make use of the not only the property but the monetary value of being able to get more campers within the Taghkanic facility. I just want to say one other thing. As we were talking about the historic value, I can remember one of the first things that was burned into my mind. We were camping at what was site platform 12 at the time, and my parents got permission to watch the Apollo launch. So I literally remember watching the 1969 Apollo launch, and that was right next to the bathhouse. They put an antenna on the roof and ran an extension cord out the window. Somebody brought a TV, and I think every single person that was camping in the park was there.
What a great memory.
Yeah, that's a great comment. I'm wondering if there are other people who have memories of the park from earlier, and if anybody wants to share any of their experiences or thoughts about what the park could be for the future either way.
But I'm looking at those fishing poles behind you and thinking, wow, fishing instructor, good.
Yeah, if I didn't live 2.5 hours away, I'd be on that lake a lot more. It's just getting there. And I don't mind the rules. I don't mind paying for to fish there. The one rule they have to keep is no gas motors except for the Ranger boat, because that'll destroy that water if they ever let gas on that lake. But if I was closer, if I lived closer, I'd be on that thing almost every day.
I see that Rich Gromek raised his hand. Rich, do you want to comment?
Yeah, I'm glad everyone's talking about the East Beach bathhouse. It's been frustrating to get the agency to take an interest in it. But in a few years ago, I discovered the Smith Ressa barn and house. And that was really floored me, the barn especially, that it was nothing has been done to it since 1961 or 62. And I think they're pretty important historic buildings. The report I put together in 2019, I mentioned that it's not going to wait a couple years for at least emergency stabilization and a roof on the barn. It's deteriorated a lot. I was out there just this past weekend. I hadn't seen it in 2 or 3 years, and it's getting pretty rough. It's not going to wait for 10 to 15 years for a master plan to be implemented. It needs help very soon.
Thank you, Rich. I did read your report. It was really helpful, and I did note that as well. The barns, and if someone's asking, where is that barn located? Chris, can you describe the part of the park that it's in?
Yeah, it's in the northern section, the undeveloped section, up by Risa Road. Right, am I saying that right? Yeah, Risa Road. We refer to it as the Risa Farm, even though that may not be accurate for the different families that have been there. But yeah, that was a acquisition there again. Just things we run it is funding for everything, right? That's one of the issues. Rich has definitely been a huge help to all over the region as I don't know what your official title was, Rich, but our basically our historic researcher for a lot of these buildings. And, you know, all of these things is if nothing is done, it just progresses of getting worse and worse. And it's just trying to find the money to revitalize these areas and buildings. And it's very, and I'll touch on septic. Lake Taghkanic is beautiful because on a beautiful water body. And a lot of the challenges we face with upgrades is anything that's changed. We have to move our septics away from the lake, which you can understand adds pumps and it becomes a very expensive process. So we have to pick and choose these projects because we don't have a blank check, unfortunately.
Any other thoughts, reminiscences, comments about what we've talked about in the planning process? I have, I think the only other thing that I haven't touched on that was in the registration was somebody suggested that we add tree identifiers in the park. And I think that would, you know, that kind of thing is definitely going to be looked at in terms of the educational programming and, you know, possibility of nature walks and, you know, evening programs. There are a lot of different ways that you can address that, interpretive signs or just little metal tags on trees too. So it's good. It's a good suggestion.
If
Anything
we don't
else?
have any more comments, we really want to thank you all for being part of us, being part of this process. And as you start to think about things in the next few days, we hope you'll reach out to us and add more questions, more comments, more thoughts, or tell other people to maybe show up on Thursday if they want to participate, learn a little bit more about the process, or just watch for, come talk to Chris and Eric at the park, and, stay involved. Tana?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks to everyone really for joining us, and you can see our contact information is on the last slide that's on the screen now. Email us, or if you're more comfortable with regular mail, you can send a letter to Megan. We ask that you submit all comments by December 1st, if possible, while things are fresh in your mind. But we will, obviously accept any ideas that you have or thoughts at any time. We'll take a look and see what comes in. And then, as Linda said, the next event is on Thursday. We're going to have the in-person meeting. I hope you'll spread the word. And if you're not attending, it'll be the same content, but just the different format. It'll be interesting because I myself have never since COVID done an in-person meeting, so it's going to be interesting to see real human beings and see if things go differently there. But thank you again for taking the time to do this, and I hope we'll hear from you soon.
Thank you. Have a good day.
You too. Bye bye.
Elizabeth, thank you. Saw your comment.